All right, so we're going to begin. Several months ago, we started a mini-series about morality and ethics. I've noticed over the past few weeks that there's a lot of confusion going on the internet, that is. People are expressing all kinds of opinions. People have many questions. Just a lot of confusion as to what is right and what is wrong. And really, the topic of ethics does concern right and wrong. So perhaps we need to somehow figure out how to tell right from wrong. Is there any way that one can differentiate between the two? And the reason I think this is important is because if we look at the world today, there appears to be a lot of conflict. The world is being pulled in all kinds of directions. And it's not just about war. It's also about family feuds. There's a lot of politics. And even though this always existed in the past, today it is being brought to our attention through TV, through the radio, through the news, and through the internet. And somehow, if you follow it, and I'm not so sure it's such a healthy thing to do, to follow all of the news or all that is going on in the world, but you're going to probably pick a side. If you look at the politics in this country, you're pretty much forced to pick a side. Are you a Democrat or a Republican? And don't think it's so simple. Even though it appears to us that there are only two major parties in this country, if you were to ask the Republicans, are you truly a Republican? And by the way, do you know what it means to be a Republican? And the politicians will tell you, well, there's no such thing as a real pure Republican because there are some that are more conservative Republicans, more liberal. There's something even called a conservative Democrat, a liberal Republican. So when I hear about this, I think, wow, we really have a big mess going on. And what is causing this mess? Why do we have to have so much confusion? Shouldn't it be easy for us to pick the winning team? After all, don't we want to pick the winning team, the one that is right, the one that is 100% right? Is there such a thing? This lecture does involve a little bit of Kabbalah. So I'm letting you know right now that you may not understand everything very clearly, but that's okay. I'll try to simplify it. But I do recommend, if you want a further elaboration on some of the concepts, that you see the lecture, The Root of War, where many of the concepts that I'm going to share tonight are somewhat more elucidated. If we look at the design of the world, look around, analyze the design of the world, you will notice that there are a lot of pairs. Pairs meaning P-A-I-R-S. Pairs. What kind of pairs? Well, there's day and night. That's one pair. Two opposites. You have male and female. That's also a pair. And even if you look at the human body, the limbs, we have two eyes, two nostrils, two ears, two hands, two legs, right? It's interesting, isn't it? It's not just the symmetry. The fact that there's something about a pair. Why should there be a pair? Why shouldn't we have three hands? I'm sure many of you could use an extra hand, right? So why only two? And by the way, why 10 fingers, not 11? Isn't that interesting? And we'll get to that a little bit later. What does 10 have to do with anything? Here we're talking about twos. Then we have holiness and impurity, as discussed in the Kabbalah. And if you're into science, you know that there are positive and negative forces. In the electromagnetic force, you have the positive and the negative, which repels. But to make it a little bit simpler, the Kabbalah says that there is right and wrong, or right and left, to be more exact. right and left. What else is there? Well, the Kabbalah says right and left is also associated, for some reason, with light and darkness. And that is why I decided to call this lecture The Forces of Light and Darkness, because that's what we are really going to be talking about. There are two sides. There's a pair out there, two very opposite forces. And if you delve further into the Kabbalah, you will notice that the difference between the two sides are represented in two of the Sefirot, two of the emanations of God, called Chesed and Gevurah. For those of you who are not familiar with emanations or Sefirot, so briefly, the Kabbalah discusses how God interacts with the physical world through 10 Sefirot, 10 emanations. He interacts in different ways, and that interaction is seen through the various powers called emanations. The major powers are Chesed and Gevurah. Chesed meaning benevolence or kindness, which is on the right, and Gevurah meaning power, or fear, or justice on the left. And there is something in between that connects the two, or more precisely, balances between the two. That's called Tiferet. Tiferet is harmony, beauty. And it is really a balance between the two, a necessary balance. In creating the world, the Kabbalah explains that the light of God, the infinite light called the Ein Sof, which fills the entire universe, everything, needed to constrict itself, needed to limit itself in order to create a physical world. Because that which is physical is limited. Whether it's a table or a chair or a human being, anything that's physical has its limitations. It's physical, and we can actually see the limits. It's not just unending. So in order to infuse this physical world with an infinite light, that infinite light needed to constrict itself. And in limiting itself in this physical world, what happened was that darkness filled a certain void as well. In other words, you have light, but that light is constricted. And if it's constricted, there's going to be something else there. And that something else is called darkness. This light of God, what is it? What is a light of God? The light of God is of goodness. It's all about goodness. Why constrict goodness? Goodness is something so special. We all want goodness. But the Kabbalah explains that the physical world cannot only have goodness. The light of goodness is so powerful that the physical world, which is full of temptations, it's physical, would not be able to handle it. And we can't go into it too much because that's a whole different topic. Just keep in mind that this powerful light, called the Ein Sof of God, would be just too much for a physical world, and God knows that, so he constricted himself, allowed darkness to be there as well, to take up some place, some space, and he could not allow the other side, the side of Gevurah, of being strict, of justice, to be there in its highest form. In other words, the world would not be able to last if justice would be as powerful as light. In other words, in the same way that light cannot be there in full force, neither can the Gevurah, which limits and constricts, be there in full force. Well, what does that mean? Justice is not only limiting, justice means that there are rules. And if you break the rules, then everything that was there ceases to exist. That's the idea behind justice. So you can't have only justice, because then the world will cease to exist. So it wouldn't make sense to allow the attribute of Gevurah to be in full force, in the same way that the light, the chesed, the kindness of God cannot shine. It needed to be limited. So Gevurah needs to be somewhat limited as well. So we have something called Tiferet. Tiferet that keeps the balance between the two. We sometimes see the goodness, and sometimes we see justice. And God manages the two. In the 10 Sefirot, there are additional powers that God interacts with human beings. And each one of them has its place and has its time. As Solomon says, "Lakol zman ve'et lechol chefetz tachat hashamayim." There's a time and place for everything. And what that means is that when we look around, we look at history, we look at human behavior, there's a lot of things going on in this world. And you ask yourself, how come all these contradictions? They appear to be contradictions. There's peace, there's war, there's goodness, there's evil. What's going on? There's a time and place for everything, apparently. Does that mean that God wants all that to take place? Not necessarily. What that means is that each one is given a certain amount of time to be around, to exist. God enables the existence of all kinds of powers for a limited amount of time. Remember, everything is limited here. But even though we see all these contradictions, and even though we see so many different types of powers, don't make the mistake of thinking that it's coming from different powers up there. It's all one God. And this is something very, very significant in the Kabbalah. That one is warned when he studies Kabbalah is not to make the mistake to think that there's more than one power out there. There's different emanations through which God interacts with this world, but there's one God. So it's all coming from God, even though he interacts through different powers, different emanations, for which there is a place and time for each one of them. All of this light that's coming down into the world needs to be contained somewhere. What's going to contain all this light? Vessels. Which vessels? The physical body. The human bodies are vessels. And how does the light contain itself in this vessel? Through the neshama, through the soul. The soul is a divine light. It is a part of God. As the pasuk says, the verse says, Ner Hashem nishmat adam. It's the candle of God, the soul. It is a part of him. So that light, that beautiful light that every human being has is limited in a sense, or constrained within a physical body. That soul, even though it's constrained within a physical body, which means that it cannot behave as it would want to behave, meaning to be so nice and benevolent and good. That's what the light of God is, right? Nonetheless, it has the ability to grow and to shine as long as the windows are not dirty. Did you understand what I meant by the windows being dirty? Well, if you're inside a house and the windows are dirty, you're not going to get so much sunlight, right? What are the windows of the soul? The eyes. The eyes are the windows of the soul. How we see this world makes a big difference. What we focus on, what we value, through our eyes, of course. The eyes are so important. But it's not because of the physical eyes. I'm just using the eyes because the eyes is a means by which we communicate, by which we make certain decisions. I mean, the eyes are important. We judge based on what we see. We may not be seeing well. That's the problem. That's where the problems begin. Our eyes could be deceiving us. That's why I'm using the eyes in a metaphoric way, because the cleaner or purer the eyes, the more that light of God will shine into the soul, that soul will connect with that light and will be able to perceive reality in a very different way than if those windows are dirty. Dirty because they're being used for the wrong things, focusing on the wrong things, focusing on that which is not important and that which is trivial. So it all depends on how we see things. And how we see things will depend on how dirty those windows are. If that soul would have access to that light, it would have access to what the Kabbalah calls Or HaGanuz. Or HaGanuz is the hidden light, the concealed light. When God created the world, He put away, He reserved a certain light that will only be introduced when Mashiach comes. It is a light that would enable us to see from one end of the universe to the other without telescopes. It's something that is incredible, something that we don't understand. It's a very special light. It is a divine light, not a physical light. And according to the Kabbalah, some of that light is hidden in the Torah. Some of the light can be found, can be uncovered. And those that immerse themselves in the Torah, especially in the secrets of the Torah, are able to draw from that light and able to know many, many things and have greater insight about this world. But getting back to what we were saying, in this world, it's a fact that there is evil. There's good and there's evil. And how do we associate good and evil? With light and darkness. For some reason, mankind has chosen to associate good and evil, which he somehow is able to identify. I mean, there's some argument about what is evil, depending on who you ask. But still, everybody will associate pretty much good with light and evil with darkness. I wonder why. Well, apparently it's in our subconscious mind. There's something special about light. And there's something awful or not good about darkness. Nobody wants darkness. Except for animals. Animals, for the most part, are nocturnal. They're active mostly at night, not when humans are active. There's a reason for that. Why God separated human activity, unless of course you have a night shift. He separated human activity to the day, and animal, for the most part, activity for the night. But why do we associate light with goodness and evil with darkness? It all comes from the Zohar. The Zohar says that light comes from the right and darkness comes from the left. Oh, that sounds familiar. Right and left, that's what we just mentioned earlier. In other words, that which comes from the right is benevolent, is good. That's the light. There's something benevolent and good about it. And that which is the opposite, that which is restrictive, or that which represents justice, or that which represents gevurah, is on the left. Darkness is represented with the left. But the interesting thing about darkness is that darkness, the nature of this darkness, which is a creation of God, wants to be included in light. It doesn't want to be by itself. Why doesn't it want to be by itself? The Kabbalah explains because darkness would starve to death if it had no light. It nourishes, it receives nourishment from light. Without light, darkness has no existence. That is why the Zohar says, when it comes to the creation of light and darkness, you will find different words being used. In light, which has substance, the word used is Yetzirah. God formed the light, Yetzirah. Whereas with darkness, the word used is Bri'ah. He created. Light has substance, and darkness has no substance. What is darkness for then? Darkness conceals the light. That it could do. Even though it has no substance, it can conceal the light. In the very beginning of creation, the rabbis tell us, Shaltu be'irbuvia. They were together. They were mixed. And all of a sudden, when you read Bereshit, Genesis, what do you see? Vahi erev, vahi boker. And it was night, and then it was day. God separated between the two. He separated between the two. Each one has a designated amount of time, let's say 12 hours each. And so does this world, the creation of God. There's a set amount of time where darkness will rule and when light will rule. In the meantime, there's a little bit of a working together, in a sense. The two are there, even though they're apart. They are there, but they are really separate. This combination of light and darkness at the very early stages of creation did have substance. That darkness had the substance of light in it. It was mixed. And perhaps, this is my own theory, darkness having substance reminds me, if you ever study astronomy, of the concept called dark matter. Astronomers have pretty much figured out that out there in space, there's dark matter. It's matter, but you can't see it. But even dark matter, that which is very dark, can be seen through special tools. There's all kinds of matter out there. But dark matter, yeah, apparently, from the very beginning of creation, this existed. Darkness that has a little bit of light in it. But the darkness that we are concerned about is not that. It's the darkness that results as a result of lack of light. The darkness that we see today in the physical world, it does not have substance. What is it? The sunset. The sun is gone. So we see darkness, we see night. As it's called in Hebrew, he'eder ha'or. The light is concealed. That's what happens when you have an eclipse. This darkness is what we are familiar with. And this is, of course, the darkness that we should be concerned about. Because it's not allowing us to see the light. I just shared with you that there's another kind of darkness that has substance, because that's how it was at the early start of creation. Plus, according to the commentaries, that is the darkness that was introduced in Egypt during the plague of darkness. Plague of darkness? What's so bad about a plague of darkness? So there's no sun. No. As the Pasuk says, V'yamesh choshech, there was a double darkness. What's a double darkness? That's a darkness with substance. You can actually feel the darkness somehow. All right. But aside from that, what we have today is a darkness that simply means a lack of light. In the field of astronomy, for those of you who are interested, there's something called a black hole, which they theorize. They haven't yet seen one, but they theorize that there's something called a black hole, which basically absorbs or swallows up all of the light and, in a sense, conceals it. But that is something that they don't fully understand. But it could be that there's something out there that can actually swallow up all the light. Even though light is lacking, even though it is something that is being concealed, all you got to do to see the light is to shine on the darkness. In other words, when you shine light on the darkness, there's light. In other words, it's not such a big deal. Even though darkness does conceal and does take away the light, in order to overcome it, all you got to do is shine a bright light. And what happens to the darkness? Zeboreach. It runs away. That's all. Turn on the light to the room, and the darkness is gone. So in reality, even though the two are very, very different, the two are somewhat opposing each other, the darkness is trying to conceal the light, but it's not so difficult to get rid of it. Just shine a bright light and you will remove the darkness. I said earlier that these two have a certain amount of time that they need to exist. This world is going to last for 6,000 years according to Jewish tradition. And we're in the year now 5775. There's not that much time left. During this time, we have a mixture of light and darkness, but even though there's a mixture, which one is the more dominant one? The rabbis tell us darkness. So in creation, what came first? Vayi erev, vayi voker. In other words, first it was dark, and then it was day, which is why the Jewish day begins at night, right? Night comes first, then comes day. The Kabbalah further teaches us that this life is a difficult life. There are struggles, darkness, pain, difficulties. Then will come the light. Then will come the rest. In other words, then mankind, when Mashiach comes, will be able to enjoy the fruits of its hard labor. So right now, even though we have the two, the dominant one is darkness. And when you have darkness, what do you have? A concealment of all that light. A concealment of the divine light. When Mashiach comes, the light of God will shine so brightly that basically there won't be any more darkness. And what that means is that there won't be any more confusion. Everything will be crystal clear. So why do we have so much confusion today? I think it is clear, right? That because you have these two opposing forces working at the same time, people cannot see which one really is the one that they should be following, which is the one that they should be embracing. Who is the winning team? Well, it depends who you ask. There's unfortunately, a lot of people who are in the dark because of what they are emphasizing, what they're focusing on. They're not bad people. I'm not talking about now bad. I'm just talking about what people tend to emphasize, what's important to them. As I said earlier, what they see through those eyes, what they enjoy, what they're attracted to. But what happens in the end is that if people are attracted to the wrong things, to that which is represented by darkness, those windows of the soul get tainted. They get dirty. And they're not able to perceive the reality anymore. They don't even see that they are wrong. They don't even see that in reality they are with the losing team, not the winning team. It may appear to them that they're with the winning team because they're prosperous, they're making tons of money, and to them that's winning. But it's really losing because you don't take it with you. Are you going to take all those millions of dollars with you to the grave? No. How could you think that that's the winning team? It's temporary. Temporary versus permanent. This world is not permanent. This is a physical world. It's limited. Time is limited. Life is limited. Everything is limited. The human being doesn't last forever. The soul is not limited. The soul is eternal. There's a big difference between the two. In order to better understand opposing forces, something that everybody can relate to, just like everybody can relate to light and darkness, just look at two very opposite traits: happiness and sadness, optimism and pessimism. Aren't they two opposites? Aren't we happy sometimes? We're excited, we're delighted, and at other times we may be sad, and God forbid, sometimes depressed, pessimistic. It happens to just about everyone in their life at times, that people have feelings of happiness and sometimes of the opposite. Here is an excellent example of two very, very different kinds of feelings. Now, you tell me which one is better. It's obvious. Everybody agrees. I think everybody, Democrats and Republicans, will both tell you happiness is great for you. You should be happy. Try to be happy all the time. Who can deny that? And any normal person will tell you it's not good to be sad. But how do you prevent sadness? They may not know. They may not have the answer to that question. It's just a fact of life. Sometimes we're sad. But do you need to be sad? No. You don't need to be sad if your eyes are clean, if those windows are crystal clear, and you have that divine light shining on your soul, then you would have a whole different outlook and perspective about life. You would see only good. You would see only the benevolence of God. Of course, you could see that God is also limiting and restrictive, and there's justice. But overall, you would see how that is also good, how also it's beneficial. You would see the harmony and the balance of why things need to be the way they are. Perspective, outlook, or as it's called in Hebrew, hashkafa, is so important for Jews and non-Jews alike. How do we see the world? Are those eyes dirty or are they clean? That will make the difference of how we see the world. When I think about that, I say to myself, look at science, how advanced they are in putting man on the moon, amongst other things. They've figured out so many things. They've been able to overcome many physical limitations. Flight, airplanes we take for granted, that's an incredible achievement. To fly like a bird? People just take it for granted. It's an incredible achievement. Science has accomplished so much in many areas, except for one. They still haven't figured out the human being. No matter how smart they are, no matter how advanced they are, no matter what tools they have at their possession, they have yet to figure out the complexities of the human being. And I don't think they ever will, because they're not aware that there's something called a soul within this physical body. There's another dimension out there, and it's not a physical dimension, which they cannot see. All they see is that which is physical, that which they can measure. And because of that, they are limited in their understanding of how this world operates. It's not just about protons, electrons, atoms, which are so small. And they know they exist. They've seen them. They've seen them work. There's more to that. There's something beyond that. There's a greater force than that, keeping everything together. But that is something spiritual, something which is not physical, something that they cannot see in the laboratory. And because they cannot see it, there's a lot they don't know about this world. But especially about the human being, because that's what we're really talking about right now, is this human being who's very confused and sees all kinds of contradictions and would love to be on the winning team, but he doesn't know who's the winning team. Or he thinks he knows, but he may not be the winning team. The following is my theory. Don't take it as a fact. I haven't seen anybody talk about it from a Kabbalistic perspective. Science may have some explanation for it, even though they can't prove it. But I have a very interesting theory that relates to the orbit and the rotation of the planets. For those of you who have not studied astronomy, basically most of the celestial bodies, when I say celestial bodies, I mean planets, moons, and even asteroids, rotate on their axis. That's called rotation. The Earth rotates on its axis once every 24 hours, right? So you see day and night. And then you have what's called the orbit of the planets around the sun. Okay? So the Earth rotates or orbits around the sun once a year. We have a solar year, right? 365 days. So you have the orbit and you have the rotation of the planets on their axis. Does everybody here know in what direction they rotate or orbit? In a counterclockwise direction. Okay? In other words, if you were to be in the North Pole looking down, you would see the rotation, you would see the orbit going in a counterclockwise direction. Now, does that tell you anything? Why does it go in that direction? Why not go clockwise? What's counterclockwise? Counterclockwise is from left to right. Oh, it's going towards the right. It's going towards Chesed. This direction of rotation and orbit going towards the right is significant. It's telling us God's plan of what He wants human beings to do. In order to be on the winning team, in order to do the right thing, you always have to go right. Something which is very much emphasized in Judaism. Always choose right over left. And why is right more important than left? Well, we've talked about it before. We've mentioned it at various times. Right represents benevolence, kindness, light. And the left is darkness. The left is Gevurah. So somehow, this orbit or this rotation is going towards the right. Except for Venus. Venus is the only planet, well, Uranus is also an exception, but I'm not going to talk about Uranus now, or Pluto. Venus is going retrograde. Retrograde meaning it's going the opposite direction. Not only is it very slow in going around the sun, but it's also very slow in rotating on its axis. And it's rotating in the opposite direction of everyone else. That's very strange. So I'm not going to get into the slowness right now. I'm more curious right now about why is it the only one that's going in the opposite direction. Because as far as speed of rotation, we have all kinds. We have Jupiter and Saturn that are very, very quick in rotating. And we have Mercury and Venus that are slower. Okay, so that's not that important. But here, Venus stands out in the direction of where it's going. In other words, on the rotation. The orbit around the sun is like everyone else. Somehow the orbit is still counterclockwise, left to right. But on its axis, Venus is different than everybody else, going from right to left. And it was clockwise. Why? I dare you to ask anybody that knows about this for an explanation. They won't have one. They'll tell you something about how it all started in the beginning of the world and how it got knocked out and shifted directions, all kinds of ideas. Nobody has a real scientific or non-scientific explanation for this. I think I have an idea. Again, this is a theory, but it may help us understand this topic. And that is why I'm including it now. Otherwise, I don't want to confuse it with astronomy too much. What did we say about the right? The right is important. Right is benevolence. Well, everything should be going towards the right. Venus is going towards the left. In other words, on its axis, it's going on to its left. In the Kabbalah, and if you learn the Tanya, you will also come across it. There's a concept called Klipat Noga. Noga is Venus. Even though in that context, Klipat Noga is not talking about Venus, but it's not a coincidence that it shares the same name. Klipat Noga is the shell of Noga. Klipa, shell, meaning the impurities. There are some impurities in this pure world. In all this light, there is darkness. There's something repelling. There's something opposing. What's this Klipat Noga all about? It's not so bad after all. It is not the darkness that we mentioned earlier. It's actually somewhat benevolent. It is what we need for this physical world. To eat, to procreate, there's nothing wrong with that. That is the physical that is actually somewhat needed, but it can be misused. The physical can be abused. Overdrink, right? Overeat, oversleep. So klipat noga is related to ta'avot, to desires that the human beings have, which of course come about through all kinds of temptations, which come about through the evil inclination, which is of course the forces of darkness. All right, but this klipat noga is somewhat necessary, but it's leading in the opposite direction. Unless you refine it, unless you subdue it and you control it and you apply the proper balance to it, it could lead people astray. It could lead people in the opposite direction. So that is why perhaps, this is again my suggestion, Venus, which is represented as klipat noga, rotates in the opposite direction. It was this power represented or embodied in Venus is retrograde to God's plan. But it's necessary. How do we know it's necessary? Because the orbit around the sun, which is the ultimate plan of God, is in the right direction. So in the end, this one also serves the ultimate purpose of creation. It rotates around the sun like everybody else. So it is equal in some ways, but on its own, by itself, if it's not for the purpose of serving God, it is in retrograde. It's going in the contrary direction, in the opposite direction, not necessarily in the good direction. Okay, so now we've come to the point of figuring out how do we clear up all this confusion. How does man take charge? How does the human being take charge of all this confusion? How can he gain clarity? How can he make sure those windows of the soul are clean? Is there anything he can do? What is the recipe? So I'm going to share with you the recipe. Very important recipe on how to clean up those windows. The human being has within him, inside of him, on his physical body, the recipe. It's written all over him. Now there's two kinds of imprints. There's the imprint on the palm, which I'm not going to talk about tonight, and that is something covered through palmistry, where man can see what he's all about, his strength, his weaknesses, his mission, if one is familiar with it. It's crystal clear, like the stars in the sky. If you know how to read it, you can tell a lot about the individual and about his mission in life. But there's another imprint, an imprint that is all over his body, but especially in the hands. The hands is something that the human being uses in a very, very different way than animals do. Hands are very important to us. The fingers are important to us. The fact that they're separate, meaning that we have a need for using them in a certain way that is very different than animals. And what's insinuated in all this? What's insinuated is as follows. 10 fingers, even though 2 hands is a pair, but within this pair, we have 10. And what are these 10 fingers? They are reminding us of the 10 sephirot, of the 10 emanations of God, through which he interacts with humanity, through which he interacts with this physical world. They're there in our fingers. Somehow each finger has a purpose. Each finger has a name, by the way, in Jewish tradition. Each one serves a purpose. And it's not just about putting a ring on your bride, which also is important. There's more to the fingers than that. What do the fingers represent besides the 10 emanations? Well, if you count the phalanges, phalanges are the various parts of the fingers. You have 3 on each finger, 3 phalanges, 3 sections, and on the thumb you have 2. So you have 3 times 4 is 12, and 2 on the thumb is 14. 14 is the numerical value of yad, hand. So you have 14 phalanges in every hand. So how many together? 28. And 28 is the numerical value of koach. It is a tremendous koach that we have within our hands. In other words, it's insinuated in our hands, through which we can accomplish a great deal. What can we accomplish? Well, Jewish tradition teaches that which needs to be accomplished and can be accomplished is represented through our forefathers, through the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Abraham represents chesed. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
The right. Yitzchak represents gevurah, justice. And Yaakov, tiferet, in between. Even though Yaakov represents emet, the pillar of truth, that is also embodied in tiferet. Because it is through emet that we can arrive at a proper harmony between these two forces of chesed, benevolence, and gevurah, justice. What are we supposed to do with these three? Chesed is the act of giving, is how we interact with the world, the outside world. Gevurah is audit. I call it an audit. We audit our actions. We concern ourselves about the consequences of our actions. So Gevurah is internal. Chesed is outward, how we interact and what we do for the world. And then Gevurah, or the fear of the consequences of our actions, is what we internalize, what we consider, what we make certain that hopefully we're doing is right. So here we need the act of chesed outwardly, but inwardly we need to ponder, we need to consider our actions and remember that those actions have consequences. So the midah of gevurah from Yitzchak is something that we need to constantly internalize and realize at all times that we are accountable for our actions. Then comes tiferet, or the midah of Yaakov, which tries to make a balance between the two. And the balance is called, in other terms, harmony. This balance that we're looking for is really what other religions have also sought. Harmony. Harmony in life. Harmony meaning a balance between that which needs to be done because God wants us to do, and that which we need for ourselves, that which we need to, of course, to survive. We need to have a balance between the two. The two are important. And the only way we can have a balance is if we are able to identify the important goals of life, which is, number one, chesed, the act of giving, of doing for others, of being kind and benevolent, this powerful force that is emulating God's ways, who's giving. Plus, gevurah, which restricts and limits, where we realize that we cannot just do anything we want. We cannot just eat anything we want, right? We cannot just, allow ourselves everything that there is. We need to restrict, we need to limit, and we need to realize that we need to be careful with what we do because our actions have consequences. All of that is gevurah. So in order to have the two, you need to have tiferet, which tells you how to balance between the two. Tiferet, however, is not just harmony. Tiferet represents truth, which is a very important concept. In order to have proper harmony, one should always strive to know the truth, the rabbis tell us. It's not just enough to want to know the truth. One needs to strive continuously to find out, is this okay or not okay? Is this true or not true? One who strives continuously to figure out what is true and what is a proper balance is going to be on the right track. He's going to be on the winning team. What happens when one does all this he will be shining a very, very powerful light. He will be cleaning up those windows of the soul. And when we shine a powerful light through the acts of benevolence and the like, what we do is we starve the darkness. The power of darkness is going to become starved and will be minimized, will be subjugated, and so much good will abound in the world. What the world has been doing until now is just the opposite. They've been increasing or giving more power to darkness, to evil, to selfishness, because that's what darkness is all about. It's about the self. It's not about the giving to others. Benevolence, light is about sharing, is about giving. And darkness is about what's in there for me. Selfishness, materialism. This constant battle between the two. Well, who's on the winning team? Well, it depends what humanity is doing, of course. And even though the humanity may be doing the wrong things, it doesn't mean that they're the winning team. But it gives the appearance. Oh, this must be okay. The majority of the world thinks like that. Yeah, but it's darkness. And if your windows are dirty, you won't see it. You'll think like them, or you'll be confused. As soon as we begin to shine a powerful light, we starve the darkness. And what else do we accomplish? What does it mean to starve darkness? Starve darkness is not just that we take away its power. The Kabbalah explains that when you shine a powerful light in darkness, you are actually redeeming or releasing all those holy sparks that are trapped in darkness. There's a lot of good everywhere in this world. A lot of good people who are in darkness. They need to be released. How are they going to be released? They don't know what to do on their own. Shine a powerful light, and you will be releasing a lot of these sparks that are trapped in the darkness. That is what a Baal Teshuvah is all about. A Baal Teshuvah, one who has repented and returned to God, he has been released from the impurities. He has been released from darkness. He sees more light. He sees where he was wrong, where he made mistakes. That powerful light through the actions that we do, in other words, the good actions, the benevolent actions, the actions where we restrict ourselves and contain our passions, right? All that has the power to release many, many sparks that are trapped in darkness. But it will not release those that are trapped very deep in darkness. It only has the power to release those that are enveloped in what we said before, klipat noga. They are in the klipa, in a shell. They're concealed. Those that are very, very deep in darkness, our Kabbalah teaches only Mashiach will bring them out. There's so much in the darkness that there's so much little light getting there. The further you go away from the sun, the less light you have from the sun. I mean, you have the light of the stars. But in order to see, we need light. And there are some that are very, very deep in darkness that only Mashiach will bring them out. Or, there's one other way to do it. If an individual works hard and on his own somehow is able to conquer his evil inclination by strengthening the positive or good inclination, that's called Hagbarat Hatov al Hara, where goodness in him becomes so strong and dominant that he can release himself from the darkness as well. That is very, very difficult, but it can be done. At the very least, however, people can come closer. People can come closer if we help them by shining a light at them. That is why it's a responsibility, a great responsibility for those who have some degree or some level of harmony in their life, is to share it with others, show others the way. And in this way, hopefully, we can help a lot of people, whether it's Family Feud, or whether it's people who are stuck, miserable, sad. Shine the light on them, and you will see how these people will change. That's a tremendous favor or benefit that every human being can do if he has balance and harmony in his life. For that, of course, those windows have to be clean. The focus has to be on the right things. And I just want to warn you, anybody that does not involve himself in these acts of benevolence and gvura, which means to limit himself and to know the limitations of what he can and cannot do, which is, another word for it is discipline. One who does not use his hands, his fingers, to do the service of God in this world, then he automatically will be working for the enemy. There's nothing in between the two, the Kabbalah says. You're either on this team or on that team. In other words, if you don't focus on doing the right things, you automatically will drift to using those hands and those fingers and all that power that we have with the opposite team, your enemy. So, how do we make sure that we stay with the winning team? The trick is, as I said earlier, to constantly aspire for the truth. Constantly ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? Constantly evaluate your actions. Strive to constantly find the truth. And if we do so, what will happen is something very, very special. We will realize in this world the difference between the peel, the fruit, and the seed. When you look at a fruit, it has three important parts. The peel, the outer shell. The fruit, which is what we eat. And the seed. Do you ever wonder why those three? The peel is just to protect. It's an outer shell. You can't tell what's inside. You haven't even tasted it. Remove the peel. The peel is not important. It needs to be there, but it's not important. What's important? That fruit that you want to eat and enjoy. So when you begin to eat that fruit, you will see, wow, there is even a seed inside. And what's that seed? That seed represents Hashem. He is the shoresh, the source of everything. That which is responsible for future life in this world, from which life has sprung. That is how, from one seed, you have a whole tree. Most people don't think about it. They just eat the apple or whatever, and that's it. They forget about the whole idea behind this. What's in this fruit? The fruit has an outer shell, but the shell is not necessarily going to be eaten. It's just to protect the fruit. It needs to be there, but remember, it's secondary. It's trivial in comparison to the actual fruit that you need to eat. People just see the shell. People forget about the fruit. And even if they taste the fruit, they don't go to the seed, and they throw away the seed. This seed can bring more life. This seed represents the origin of life. So when you begin to analyze everything through clean eyes, you will see that in life, many things are so unimportant. They're just klipot that you throw away, you peel off, and you throw in the garbage. Yes, it's necessary to protect the fruit, but that's it. The fruit is more important. The fruit represents our deeds, our actions, our accomplishments, as far as benevolence is concerned, as far as knowing our limitations, and as far as harmony is concerned. And finally, why is it then that so many people who want to be on the winning team, who want to do the right things, who want to enjoy this light, how come they're having such a hard time? Why are they struggling? And the answer is with the following story. There was once a group of people that were traveling out of town, and on the road they saw somebody standing. I guess he was waiting to be taken. He was waiting to catch a ride. Okay. They continued on because they were going in an opposite direction. They came back a week later, and he was still there. And they asked him, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm waiting for a ride." "How long have you been waiting for a ride?" "For a week." He says, "Where are you going?" "To Jerusalem." He says, "Oh, that's so terrible that you've been waiting for 7 days for a ride to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is only 2 days' walk from here. Had you begun to walk, you would have been there several times already, and you were just waiting for a ride. If you know something is true, begin to walk." Thank you.